The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Eran Livneh, and I see that we have here people from pretty much all over the world, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you depending on where you are, and thank you for joining us today. We have lots of people still joining us as we speak here, but I know your time is valuable, so let's get started right away. Before diving in, I'd like to share a few words about continuity software. For the past 8+ years, we have been helping organizations address the challenges of managing high availability and disaster recovery in complex enterprise environments. We work with many of the world's largest financial services companies, as well as other organizations in many other verticals. And that gives us a really unique view of the challenges that these organizations face when it comes to service availability, as well as some of the best practices that have been implemented to address these challenges. So what we'd like to do here over the next 30 minutes or so is share with you some of the things that we have learned, or what we call the state of service availability today. And to that end, we will also share with you some results from a survey we conducted earlier this year, which I think you will find both relevant and interesting. Our main presenter today is Doron Pinhas, Chief Technology Officer for Continuity Software. Doron has over 20 years of experience in large enterprise business continuity and IT infrastructure management. He spends a good portion of his time talking and working with leading organizations worldwide. So we are very thankful to get his time today to share his observations and knowledge with us. I want to mention that at the end of the session, as time permits, Doron will take questions from the audience. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation using the panel on the right side of your screen. But first, I would actually like to put a question out there to you. Our topic today is service availability, and I would like to see what is actually driving service availability in your organization. Now, I know that there is more than one thing, but please try to choose the #1 issue that is driving the need to ensure service availability in your organization. And we'll give it a few more seconds, and once we're done here, I will share the results with you so we can all see them. So I see that people are still voting. We'll give it just a few more seconds here. Okay, we're getting there. And let's see the results. Okay, so as you can see here, customer satisfaction is the #1 driver, followed by productivity and revenue loss. And that's very interesting. Let me share with you some of the results that we got when we posed a similar question in our survey. And obviously our survey went to a broader audience in financial services. And it's interesting to see that the results here are somewhat different from the results we received today. But I think that actually illustrates one of the points that we want to make here. And that is that every organization would have different service availability drivers and goals. And therefore the level of investment in service availability is also going to be different according to these goals and priorities. One other point is that we are actually seeing that service availability goals not only vary among different companies, they also vary among different business services within the company. And as you can see illustrated here, the point is that although we would all like to see 100% service availability across the entire enterprise, we all know that this goal is unrealistic. So what's really important is for each organization to understand which business services are the most critical and allocate the appropriate resources to ensure the highest availability for these business services. Another data point from the survey that I wanted to share with you is the availability goals that banks and financial services organizations have in place for their critical business services. And as you can see, these goals are rather aggressive, which is not very surprising. But what is somewhat surprising and honestly rather disconcerting is that most organizations don't actually meet their own goals. As you can see here, the more aggressive the goals are, the fewer organizations that meet these goals. So that obviously begs the question, why? Why do we keep seeing downtime in critical business applications in banks and elsewhere? And maybe more important, what can actually be done to minimize these events? So with these questions in mind, I will turn it now over to Doron. Doron, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Eran, for the introduction. As I'm becoming a presenter, it will take just a few seconds for me to transfer control to my own desktop. Perfect. So hopefully we are back on. So with Eran's question, why does it happen? Why do we still have downtime? In order to attack this question and also address some questions around how can we actually improve our situation, I'd like to take a look at what's being done to date. And so we definitely happen, but not for lack of effort. So if you look at the spending map across the financial sector, you will find that there is a tremendous amount of investment, first off in technology to support maximum service availability. And I don't intend to go through the entire stack, but obviously in each one of those subcategories underneath high availability and redundancy techniques and underneath disaster recovery tools and processes, there is tremendous investment. But part of the problem is, A, that this significant configuration effort has to be carried out by multiple IT silos within the enterprise and sometimes with the help of vendors. So this proliferation of owners, vendors, and technologies does attribute to some of the complexity, and perhaps it may explain to a certain degree why we still have risk, but that's hardly not the main reason. And what we are trying to suggest, and as we'll demonstrate a little bit later, perhaps the best way to get more control over our risk and dramatically reduce our exposure to risks is by slightly altering the processes we deploy today. What I'm trying to suggest is that perhaps the next step in the evolution of BCP management is to build a new set of processes and measurement tools to allow us to enforce our compliance with our own internally set goals. And at least as we've seen from the poll earlier, our attendees today are more concerned about making sure their business provides service on an ongoing basis. So just to recap this argument, I'd say we have made a tremendous progress over the last decade or so in being able to articulate what are our actual recovery goals by application tier, what are recovery priorities, and what they should look like. And we are also making tremendous steps in being able to articulate those across the board, but we don't have yet tools today, or at least most of us do not have tools, to allow us to be able to measure our compliance with those own goals in a frequent and efficient enough manner. So if you look at the types of risks this leaves us exposed to, it's possible to divide them into three somewhat overlapping categories. The first is the risk of our actual IT design not being perfectly aligned with the business requirements. So we've set up goals for a particular tier of our applications to have a certain RPO and a certain level of redundancy and recovery capacity, but in reality it has been designed somewhat differently. So that's one area which is currently a little bit tricky to track, so to speak. Another area is the technical front. So we may have had a system that used to work perfectly, but over time, as changes are introduced, small configuration gaps or imperfect changes may be applied to some portions of the environment, but not provisioned perfectly across all of our recovery components. For example, and we'll see some of those later, you upgrade the capacity of a production application, but for some reason the DR configuration is not updated with similar addition of resources, so we won't be able to meet your capacity goals. That's a very common example. And the last area is communication, not necessarily IT networking as much as human communication, and perhaps this is one of the main areas in which we see problems occurring into the infrastructure to prevent it from successfully operating. A certain team does a change, it is not communicated clearly enough to the BCP team or to the storage team or to the server team, and we may actually work together to achieve the same goals, but because of lack of communication, we'll fail in some aspects. And to make those areas a little bit more clear, I've chosen to pick up only two quick examples that we see practically on a daily basis creeping into IT and preventing us from meeting our recovery goals. So the first one is almost obvious. We had a production system to the left, which is using storage-based replication, and for some reason, someone added a new volume which has no replica. So from that point on, obviously, if we'll try to exercise our recovery plan, we'll find that all the data gets lost. So obviously, this can happen because of a technical mistake, but it can also happen because of miscommunication. Perhaps our storage team did create a new volume for us, and when transmitting that information, it was not clear enough, so a server team used the wrong disk, and so on. Maybe the database team used the wrong volume. And of course, there are many other permutations of that particular area and many other areas in which small miscommunication incidents will eventually add up minor discrepancies that keep building up in our infrastructure. Like everyone knows that it's a challenge to make sure that our production and recovery systems are maintained with the same patch level and hardware capacity and software licenses and network setting and so on and so forth. So that's almost obvious. Now, if you try to analyze a little bit in more detail, why do we get there in the first place? Because we do have a certain process in place. This is well known, I'd guess to all of you. We do have a process of testing our compliance with our goals, notoriously known as DR tests. But there are certain shortcomings to this approach. This is a very valuable process, don't get me wrong, but basically there is no option to run DR tests very frequently, simply because DR tests require the business to allow certain windows of downtime in most cases. And this is not really realistic or even desirable to have those spaced too often. And it's definitely not desirable for IT teams to run those tests too often, because that's an awful task, right? So it's not possible and not desirable to do really frequently. But if you come to think of it, that's the only way we have today to make sure our recovery systems can work. And if we look at the diagram below, what it shows us is, let's say, each one of those small circles is an IT change, and these happen on a daily basis. We patch our servers, we add more storage, we add new version, we change our versions, and so on. And every small change represents a minor risk, especially if it happens in between those two tests. So the risk level gradually grows. So after we complete our yearly or semi-annual DR test, we may fix all of the identified issues and have our business in a top shape. But very quickly, those changes keep on piling up. And at a certain point, really quickly after the end of a test, we are no longer in a position where we can guarantee that we are recoverable. And so a new paradigm is necessary to allow us, and it can't be DR testing, to allow us to stay on top of our actual readiness level and of our risks. And so with that, we'd like to run our second poll of the day, and I can actually reveal some of the data we have around industry statistics. But how often are you testing and sampling your RPOs and RTOs today. So we'll leave you with a short while to answer and then share with you the results. And Ron, please give me a cue when this process is done.
Sure, people are still voting. We'll give it a few more seconds here. We're getting up there in the number of votes, and we'll close it in just a few seconds. And I think we're getting there. Okay, so.
Okay.
So as we can see here, it's most people do it once a year, maybe a few times a year. We certainly have 0 here for weekly, monthly, 0 for daily, and actually 23% for less than once a year.
Okay. By the way, this is in this case, it's a perfect match to previous indication we've had, and indeed the industry average in the banking community in particular is around once a year, and that's pretty uniform without any regard to location, geography, and so on, and size. So and indeed some will strive, and it's a very difficult task to test more frequently. So ideally, as I said, even if you manage to bring it down to once every quarter, quadrupling the amount of work you do, it's still not going to get you close enough to bridging the window of risk. In order to close window of risks, we must have a new way of measuring our readiness and identifying our risks. So ideally, what we would like to achieve is a state in which we can have daily checkpoints, and I'm deliberately not using the word DR testing. No one wants or can run a full DR test every day, even though that's probably the most effective way of knowing we can actually recover. So in the most of the remainder of today's session, what I'm going to show you is how this can actually be accomplished and how it's actually done by one of our customers. So we've recently released a case study from the banking industry, which has been published, and we can easily get copies to anyone who hasn't managed to get one after today's event. And so what I'm going to do in the next slide is describe roughly what has been accomplished and what tools and features this particular bank has today, and then talk a little bit about the benefits drawn from being able to implement this new process where you can checkpoint your availability across all the IT silos on a daily basis. So to do that, I'm actually using a combination of screenshots and conceptual views. Now, the first fundamental capability set up by the bank was to provide clear visibility across processes, goals, and coverage to all relevant silos, from management to the BCP team, to the DR teams within IT, to the various IT silos, storage, databases, servers, virtualization. So each one can subscribe the same business view. The entry point is the ability to see a business dashboard. So skipping most of the data here, to the top right, the bank is able to actually take a look at each and every business service and the actual status thereof. It is possible at the press of a button to get up-to-date diagrams of each and every business service. And you can really drill down into the service components, clusters, databases, instances, storage volumes, and replication in a very, very easy way. So that's a fundamental feature, providing the same vision, same view across the board. The next part is even more interesting. So the bank has implemented a process that allows to measure all the relevant aspects of service availability. So I'll describe some of them in brief, and of course we can cover more on the questions and answer part a little bit later. So the first, which may be important for those of you who are dealing with business continuity on a daily basis, is the ability to model, track, and measure RPO and RTO and other KPIs, key performance indicators, that characterize the service levels we expect to assign each of our business applications. So by measuring your RPOs and capacities and RTO and redundancy level on an ongoing basis and aggregating into a unified view, you can really understand where you stand at any point in time. And that's added to the ability to set up thresholds and get immediate alerts when you breach those service goals. So for example, if you created 3 recovery priorities, or recovery priority 1 has a requirement to have 2 copies to 2 different sites. One is synchronous, the other is up to 15 minutes. We need to have a certain capacity and a certain level of redundancy. You apply it to business service, and on a daily basis, if there are any violations or deviations from the set plan, you'll get an alert. The next area, which is somewhat related but different, is the ability to automatically get under a single platform mapping of all the possible exposures in the IT configuration that could lead to downtime and data loss. So remember our classification of issues into design, maybe what we've seen earlier falls under the category. Did we design our systems to meet the right levels and KPIs? The next one is under the technology discrepancies and also around the miscommunication. If any configuration has been done to the environment which present a potential violation of vendor best practices, we'll see it here, and also there is the ability to actually drill down. So with these capabilities, the bank is now able to see on a daily basis a map of the business services. How do they comply to the set goals of business continuity, recoverability, replication, so on, and are there any open technical gaps that may put the systems at risks? So this is not only identification, but also a full life cycle management, so you can actually see when a problem is solved and how much time does it take, and over a period of time, tracking KPIs is possibly the only way to build a truly successful improvement process. Without those, you fly without instruments. Finally, what the bank has managed to build is a collaboration platform around the feature we've seen so far. So it begins from the obvious features you would expect, such as being able to send automated email notification to various distribution lists, so each team will get alerts that are relevant to the specific subject matter within their domain, and also to automatically aggregate some of those events to enterprise management systems. And this particular bank is using more than one. The next feature is that since they are now able to identify those issues and also document all the relevant aspects, let's say we have an RPO breach, we can actually view whether it's at the database layer, storage layer, server layer, or any combination thereof, and share that information between teams. And that actually drives also for much more accurate reporting to management and in between silos. Now, describing the state of the business becomes a very, very easy process, both to management and to external auditors. And this level of transparency is actually good for everyone, because what I've been hearing a lot of times is that when an issue does occur, IT will come up and say, hey, but management was informed that we don't have enough capacity to support recovery. We informed that 6 months ago. But since this is not really tracked over time, there is no clear visibility to everyone on board what kind of exposures occur and how long are they open. It's no wonder that the attention of the board will drift away. So a system that shows all of the exposures over time is actually the best way. Transparency is the best way to run your business. And so basically that leads, I want to talk about some of the benefits. And again, these are all summarized up in the case study we've published, and if any of you are interested, we can get you a copy. But measured over time, this leads to some impressive results. So the bank has measured the number of incidents they have, whether localized or global, reaching over time, and the number of support calls they have internally for each one of the business silos and IT silos, and then compare that to the relevant period the next year once the system has been established. And what it reveals is pretty interesting. First of all, 70% reduction of localized and more far-reaching downtime events. So clusters starts working when you need to fail over, it actually works because you know that you're ready. But there is also another interesting aspect in which the tool actually helps to save on ongoing operations, because when you go into proactive detection of risks and vulnerabilities and you have a system to show the root cause, it's much more easier to fix problems. So we all know that preventative medicine is much more effective in many respects to our health and budget than reactive medicine, and that applies also to business, not only to the human body. And of course, one of the pleasant side effects was the fact that whereas in the past ADR test would entail several hundreds of rejects and would always require retests, very quickly a state has been reached in which most tests succeed smoothly with very little hiccups on the first time, and the small glitches that are still found are mostly already identified, but there was no opportunity to fix them prior to the test. And with that in mind, some of our customers, not this particular bank, have actually decided to space out a little bit the testing frequency, relax them a bit, and get them to the area of only once a year because they have the comfort level knowing everything works. So with that, I believe it's a good time to take your questions. If there is anything that we won't be able to answer online, and we do want to respect your time, we'll make sure to cover those on a case-by-case basis, and we'll take it offline. And Eran, and this is where I need your assistance because I guess you're the best geared to filter the most common questions.
Sure. So we do have some questions coming here, so let's try to plow through them. So one question is, do you actually measure RPOs or do you just provide estimates?
Oh, so yeah, I have not touched upon that really clearly. So there is no estimation work here, no guesswork. We actually do it the right way and the hard way. We measure the actual time it takes to make any type of business copy out there, whether it's disk-based replication, file system-based replication, database-based replication, from the specific volume to the database to the application. And all of that is aggregated. So when you take a look at your dashboard, you can actually see the actual RPO per element, whether it's a full business service or just a specific instance of your database and so on. So it's actual measurement as opposed to estimation.
Okay, great. And there is a related question here actually, which is you talked about automated risk discovery. Does it also highlight what kind of risk it is and how much impact it has on the business service?
Yes, of course. So, well, the point here was not to make too much of a show out of their technology, but we do have a risk discovery engine that covers more than 5,000 different possible risks across multiple IT and business areas. So the risks detected will be very fine-grained. We can show you whether the issues are within the storage framework, SAN fabric, multipathing, server and operating system, patch level, replication engine, cluster setting, VMware SRM. So it's very, very specific, and whenever we present a risk, we won't only show you the trail from the business service to the components that's failing and how they interact, but also show you what's necessary to fix the problem, provided with diagrams on what does it look like. And that can be very, very handy when you have a real event. Let's say you're in the middle of a crisis. Something doesn't start up as you expect it. You take a look at our technology, by the way, it's called RecoverGuard, and see what issues are still open, and they'll contain all the details you need to understand what the system looked like when they still worked in production and what you need to do to bridge the gap. So that's very, very detailed, and this is a good question. What else can we fit in? I know our time is getting short.
Sure. Let's try at least one more question. So there are a couple of questions here around getting this thing to work and setting it up. So I guess in general, how difficult is it to put such process in place?
Well, I'll just bring up this slide in the meanwhile. So obviously it depends on the size and scale of the particular customer environment at hand. So it doesn't cut from the same measure. What I can say is that you can within a few weeks only, because this is a technology that requires no agents to set up. There's a certain amount of preparation and security certification, but within few weeks of setting up the tool, you can get immediate values. The tool will, out of the box, detect your risks and associate them to business services. And depending on the size of the enterprise, it can take longer to fully reap the full benefits. So anything from several weeks to a month or two if you have hundreds of servers to manage. And it can take longer if you have thousands of servers to manage, but at least within a very short period of time, you can get immediate, tangible values, and the rest of the time is dedicated to incorporating the technology into your ITIL landscape. So these will take a little bit longer to figure out what's the best flow. So weeks to more, depending on the size. And I believe our time is actually running out, and we do want to respect your schedule. So Eran, maybe some wrapping words?
Exactly. So we are running out of time here. We will take the rest of the questions, as we mentioned, offline, and we will get back to you with the responses. I wanted to thank you again for joining us today. I hope this was valuable to you, and we'd be happy to talk to you if you're interested in learning more. So with that said, have a great day.
Thank you all.